Thank you very much, Senator. Okay, now we're going to have a national security block. I want to introduce first an American hero, General Gary Harrell. He was head of all Delta Force and also was the head of all Special Forces in the last war. A true American patriot. General.
Thank you all very much. I appreciate that. See if I can get this down a little bit. It's a very humbling privilege to be here today. As a matter of fact, I've learned more about the Constitution and the amendments and everything else than I thought was possible, and I thought I knew quite a bit about it before that. Man, we've had some fantastic speakers today, and I know that there's some more on the agenda that are going to follow me. When Joe asked me to come and speak, I said, well, what do you want me to talk about? He said, well, just talk about the military. You know a little bit about that, don't you? And I said, yeah, I think I do. So I'm going to do that. I got tickled. I was, when my wife and I were on our way down here, I got a phone call from a fairly liberal friend. And he said, where are you going? I said, I'm going to the Tea Party convention. He goes, oh, man, you're going to that? I said, yeah, I am. I'm proud to be going. He said, it's nothing but a bunch of rednecks. I said, you know what? I'm glad about that because I'm a redneck and I'll fit right in and I know the language. You know, talking about the military, the original Tea Party was our forefathers that founded our country. You can't say it any other way. Most of them, several of them, as you know, forfeited their lives. Most of them put everything they had on the line because they had an idea for what freedom and liberty could do for people that had never been done before. No other country had ever done that. And our military service dates back to 1776 on the fields in Lexington and on a bridge in Concord where an American force took on the Brits. And that was unheard of. The British Army and Navy made them the strongest power in the world at that time. And I can only imagine what their commanders must have been thinking when they came up against this group of rabble. That's probably what they thought of them. And they must have thought, who in the world do these people think they are taking us on? And not only did we take them on, we whipped their butts. Matter of fact, I was in Jordan, and I was talking to the king about some stuff, and when I went to see Abdullah, who he and I were lieutenant colonels together at the same time, and that's how we got to be friends. When I went to see him, the British ambassador was there, and I had a present for Abdullah that I was going to give him, just happened to be a tomahawk. So when I went in and saw the British ambassador and the king introduced me, I said, you know, I'd just like to show you something because with this, a lot of my ancestors whipped your ass. He took it in good stride. But that's why they called it the shot heard around the world, because nobody could believe that a bunch of American patriots would take on the British Army. And then it wasn't too much longer. Actually, it was October the 7th, 1780, when a bunch of people met in battle at a place called Kings Mountain. And most people don't pay a lot of attention to that. I do because it was very significant. And the people that left from East Tennessee and western North Carolina and walked down here to South Carolina over some 13 days took on a force that by all tactics should not have worked, because if you take on an entrenched force, especially fighting uphill, you need at least 3-1 to have a chance to win. They were evenly matched, or they outnumbered us a little bit, depending on whose version of the story you read. It's really not important. But you see, this British lieutenant colonel named Ferguson had sent a letter over to what they called the Over Mountain people in East Tennessee and Western North Carolina. Basically what it said is, you guys aren't playing by the rules, you're not paying attention to us, and if you don't knock it off, I'm going to come over there and lay waste to your countryside and hang you all and kill your wives and families. That's a nice version of how the letter read, I believe. So the people over there, kind of like they would today and like you would too, they didn't like that letter. They all got together at a place called, now it's called Elizabethton. Watauga Shoals was what it was called then. And they decided that they needed to do something about this guy. So they walked for 13 days and caught him on top of Kings Mountain. His name was Ferguson, and he died with some 9 or 10 bullet holes in his body. It took him about an hour, and the battle was over. And one other significant thing about that battle. You know what the weapons were back then. They had single-shot rifles. The Brits had bayonets on the end of their rifles. Our guys mostly didn't, although I'm sure some of them figured out how to strap on a butcher knife or a Bowie knife or something like that. But they repulsed at least 3 charges from the British forces where the guys with the bayonets coming downhill tried to run them off the hill. Didn't work very well, and in about an hour the battle was over. And you know, we could probably go on for hours with similar stories about how the military has served. But I want to share about 3 vignettes with you. And first, I want to start with how I started. I grew up in East Tennessee on a small farm, about 20 acres. And my dad talked to me as I got to be older, and he said, look, we want you to go to college, but we can't pay for it. So if you want to go, figure out how to go. I said, okay, I can do that. One day in high school, I was listening to an announcement over the intercom and said, if you want to go learn about an ROTC scholarship, go to Mr. Slonicker's homeroom. Well, I wasn't real sure what an ROTC scholarship was. Thought I knew. Wasn't real sure. But I knew it was not Mrs. Reed's 5th period algebra class. 34 and a half years later, I retired as a 2-star general. I was fortunate enough to command in combat at every level, and that pretty much culminated with the last war. I got the privilege of working for General Tommy Franks, who was the CENTCOM commander. I commanded SOC CENT, which was all of the Special Operations Forces, all the Coalition Special Operations Forces, and was very privileged to do that because that was the largest force of special operations that we've put on the ground since World War II. And Franks is one of the best bosses commanders I ever worked for. The Brits didn't really want to have unity of command. They wanted to have unity of purpose. And General Franks asked me what I thought about that, and I told him. He calls the Brits up. He goes, hey, look, you guys can either work for Gary or you're not going to be part of the coalition. It's up to you. We don't care. The other great thing about Franks is I flew into Riyadh, and the USS Cole had just blown up. Tragic terrorist attack. There was no way that anybody on that ship could have known what was coming. But they snuck in, like when the ships come into port, these Boston whalers come around, they're selling fresh food, all this stuff. That's what they were doing. This Boston whaler was full of explosives. Killed 19 sailors. But I called Franks and I said, hey, sir, I just got on the ground in Riyadh. What do you want me to do? He says, I want you to go to Yemen. I said, okay. Actually, it was a little more colorful than that because he's a very colorful guy. But I said, after I get down there, what do you want me to do? He said, I don't know. It's what I pay you for. And, of course, he put a few more expletives in than that. For those of you who might naively think there were no weapons of destruction in that battle, in that war, I suggest you go home and look up sarin gas. I suggest you look up the missiles they had that exceeded the UN parameters. I suggest you look up the reports that every intel agency in the world had provided for us to read that said this guy's using weapons of mass destruction. Now, he may not have had nuclear bombs, but I got to tell you, and most of the military folks in the audience will agree, I think, there can be a lot worse things in the world that's thrown at you than nuclear bombs. Bugs is one of them, and they were experimenting with that. Sarin gas is terrible. Matter of fact, I would tell you that based on the intel reports we had, if the president hadn't taken us to war, we should have tried him for treason. Because the days when you could wait on an enemy army to mass on your border and come in and attack you are long gone. 5 people with the right stuff in a small airplane, I started saying a Piper Cub, but that's too many people, flying up the East Coast into the wind with nuclear or biological agents, if they deployed that, and, you know, it would probably not be too hard to sneak in, the kill number that they would get out of that is in the millions. And it's not in the low end. It's not ones or twos. It's up there. So anyway, that's what we were facing. And if you think Franks went in because there was some kind of, ulterior motive that was not to go in and take care of the weapons of mass destruction and the threat we had to that part of the world, I would tell you don't know Tommy Franks very well. I don't know how you'd get him to do something that he thought was wrong or not the right thing, but it would be very, very hard. He's a great guy, and he's a straight shooter. One of my favorite quotes is from a guy named George Orwell, who says, "We sleep safely in our beds at night because rough men stand ready to do violence in our behalf." I'm glad we do. And I got to work with several of them and got to know them. And I want to cover about 3 small vignettes with you. In Mogadishu, many of you have probably seen the movie Black Hawk Down. I was a ground force commander for those troops. And in Mogadishu, after the second Black Hawk was shot down, we started about an 18-hour battle that seemed to go on forever at the time. I want to mention some names, though. Randy Shugart, Gary Gordon, Grizz Martin, Earl Fillmore, Dan Bush, and Matt Ryerson. I'm sorry, but those were close personal friends. And we lost them in that operation. But there were some 18 Americans killed. And I want you to know that about 100 Americans took on something like 10,000 Somalis. And they killed or wounded the better part of, we don't know, 2,000 or 3,000 that night. We won that war. We won that battle, although we did have casualties. But we snatched defeat from the jaws of victory because of some political decisions that were made. We were going in that day after about 4 or 5 of Adid's top lieutenants, and we had 20 loaded in the truck when the first Black Hawk got shot down. Randy Shugart and Gary Gordon were snipers. They were orbiting in a helicopter overhead, and when the second Black Hawk went down, they asked to be put in. They asked 3 times before the commander put them on the ground. They probably lived about 20 minutes. We don't know. You don't go back in combat and put crime scenes together, put up yellow tape or anything like that. But we think they probably lived about 20 minutes before they ran out of ammo. But as a result of their heroic action, Mike Durant's alive today. And I see Mike every once in a while, and we share some thoughts about that. And And justifiably so, Gary and Randy were awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. Fast forward a little bit to 2002, and I want to tell you about an operation called Operation Anaconda down the Shyakot Valley. It was run in an area where the Afghans had defeated the Soviets that came down there to fight them. And it was because they had a huge mountain called the Whale, and the Whale was full of caves. So when the enemy forces came against them, the Afghans would run back in the caves, and then they'd come back out, put a mortar down, and drop mortar rounds. And they defeated the Russians doing that. Well, when we went down there, we got into a pretty good shooting match. And I remember one of the young NCOs who was a sniper, and he started picking off the enemy gunners when they'd come out. And when he did that, of course, they couldn't drop mortar rounds on them. Well, we tried to get that guy to come back in, and he laid in the snow, picking those guys off and refusing to leave his post until after he had developed hyperthermia. We had to bring him in, to wrap him up in blankets, pour hot water on him. And if that is not somebody that should be highly appreciated for his dedication to duty, I don't know what is. One more quick vignette. We were running some operations out of Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan, and we brought many Afghans to the air base. We vetted them very carefully, and I don't care what you've been told, there was no such thing as us just grabbing a guy off the street and sending him to Gitmo. Everybody that went to Gitmo went because they'd been cleared by all of our intel agencies, or somebody knew about them being on a battlefield. No innocent shepherds went to Gitmo on my watch. And why in the heck we're turning them loose, I don't know, but I will guarantee you they're going to kill more Americans since we turned them loose. But anyway, when we were doing that operation, we brought some Afghans in to be processed. They'd been picked up out on the road, and I was down there watching what was going on. It's about 3 o'clock in the morning, and there was a pickup truck there with this old guy in it, some blankets. And he was the last guy on the truck. So since I'm the guy in charge, I'm going up there to try to find out what's going on. And I come across this old Afghan guy. He's laying in the back of that truck. He's got gangrene that's already taken one leg, and it's halfway up the other leg. He smelled like a 10-day-old dead goat. And I'm thinking, man, what are we going to do with this guy? And about that, I'm trying to look about getting him out of the truck, couldn't figure out how to do that. And one of my NCOs came up. He elbowed me out of the way. He said, "Boss, get out of the way." He said, "I'll take care of this." He reaches over and he scoops that guy up, and he carries him in to the doctor. You see, we have a rule. If an enemy combatant is wounded, we give them the same level of treatment that we give ourselves. As a matter of fact, that guy would have died if we'd have let him go that night, if we hadn't have taken him out of the truck. But you know why we do that? Because we're Americans. That's what we do. You know, I know a lot of other speakers have talked about this, and I'm in complete agreement. We're in trouble. And if you hadn't figured that out, let me add my 2 cents worth to it. We're a rudderless ship of state. You know, somebody talked earlier about following from behind. You know what that's called? Leading from behind? That's called following. It's not leadership. And if you say that the United States should not be the world leader, who would you nominate? North Korea? Russia? Now, Putin does have a lot of leadership. You're just not going to like where that leadership takes you. maybe North Korea, Kim Jong-un, he's what, in his mid-20s? And he'd be a great person to rule the world and make sure everybody did everything right. Not exactly. But, it baffles me why there is this aversion to saying that the United States is leading an effort. Because until we do, probably nobody else is going to get on board. And everybody goes, well, we don't like these colonial ventures and powers and all that. The only thing I ever know we've asked for as a nation, I'm aware of since we were formed, is enough room to bury our dead. That's all we want. So, I think the other thing we're failing miserably at is identifying who the enemy is. If a guy with a beard, or not, is running at you with a 4-foot-long knife, yelling, Allah Akbar, you should shoot him before you find out anything else about him. And I don't understand why we're arguing about whether or not that was a terrorist attack. Allah Akbar, long beard, big knife. It was a terrorist. You can take that to the bank. I guarantee you. But some people have trouble with that. But folks, one of the things you should be asking when you talk to your senators and your congressmen is, what is our strategy to defeat ISIS? I refuse to call them ISIL. What's the strategy? There's a Bible verse that says, without vision, the people will perish. Well, that's the same thing as not having a strategy and running around in circles like we're currently doing. We're going to fly over a drone. It'll take 1 or 2 out. You know how long it takes them to replace that guy? Now, I am not bemoaning the fact that we killed their leadership. I am saying that it doesn't take long for somebody else to step up, and sometimes the new guy is worse than the old guy. You run that risk. And the other thing with the drones is there's a guy in Nevada flying that drone. He can't really see all the stuff going on the ground. I'm not against that, but when you go in on the ground and you take somebody out in a raid, then you get all the information, the pocket litter, their computer, all that stuff. Just think how much that can be exploited by our intel community, which is very, very capable. But if we've got a strategy, I sure as heck haven't heard it. The strategy in World War II was kind of play a holding action, but fight Japan, go in, take care of Germany, and then take care of Japan. And that's pretty much what we did. And, you can look it up on your internet, and you'll find a much longer version of that, but that's basically what we did in World War II. But I haven't heard anything about what our strategy is, and I don't think so. The other thing that I think is absolutely disgusting is our VA situation. We promised that when our soldiers went to war, they would be taken care of when they came home, regardless. And I heard Governor Huckabee say this. I think it's way beyond time to take care of them by saying, here's a credit card. You got a problem? Go to X hospital and get it taken care of. To heck with building hospitals, funding large studies, and all that other stuff. Get rid of it. And I say that, and we've got a VA back home that's been pretty doggone good when I've gone for care. We have way too many that are putting people on waiting lists, destroying waiting lists, and we got way too many vets dying every doggone day because our country is not living up to what they promised they would do. I agree with the previous speakers that have talked about trampling on the rights given to us by the Constitution, actually given to us by God, but listed in the Constitution. I'll only hit a couple of them, but I'm amazed at how quickly we've gone from freedom of speech to political correctness. I think it's way beyond appropriate to put a stake in the heart of political correctness. And I don't know, but sometimes you just need to turn to some of these people and say, look, you know, if that bothers you, why don't you put on your big boy britches and go home? You know, it's already been mentioned that we are not strengthening our Army. We're cutting our Army enormously back to pre-World War II levels. And you know, one of the other big things that's going on is our rules of engagement, which are very, very important. When we started that war, we had 4 or 5 rules of engagement. We briefed that to Secretary Rumsfeld. The lawyers immediately said, wait a minute, what does this mean? What does that mean? What does this mean? Rumsfeld said, stop. You lawyers leave the room. He looked at us, all the subordinate commanders and Franks, and he said, did you guys write this? We said, yes, sir, we sure did. He said, okay, do you all approve it? We all said, yeah, that's what we put it down on paper for. He said, okay, it's approved. Bring the lawyers back in now. We need to do more of that. Almost every time a soldier, Marine, sailor, whatever, fires a weapon and kills somebody, there's a criminal investigation division, CID. I'm not going to tell you what we really call the CID agents because that would be ugly, but they do that, and that's completely wrong. That's taking the authority out of the hands of the commander, yada, yada, yada. Unless you have evidence that there was something malicious or something illegal done, you got to take the word of the guy who was there being shot at. One of the last actions I took care of before I retired in 2008 was a team sergeant that had gone into a room in Iraq. I'll get it right in a minute. Too many eyes. And when he gone in, he'd been shot in the chest and hit by 2 rounds. His bulletproof vest stopped it. He returned fire and killed the guy. I got the paperwork that said he was under investigation. And fortunately, I was a deputy CG, so I could say, no, we're not going to do that. This is obviously a clear shooting. There was no evidence of anything else. But if you get shot at twice and you return fire and kill somebody, I think that's legal, even in combat. But I'll tell you how important the rules of engagement are. Right now, unless it's changed, and I don't think it has, if you're driving down the road and you receive fire from a mosque, you cannot return fire. If you're driving down the road and you receive hostile fire from a mosque, you cannot return fire. You all have some great ideas. I couldn't even begin to tell you why, ma'am, but I will tell you that the idea behind it is the mosque is a place of worship that you shouldn't shoot at it. Now, if 2 Muslim armies are fighting and one of them shoots at the other one from a mosque, guess what their rules allow them to do? Return fire. Now, why we're not doing that, I don't know, but we're not. Our ROE needs some corrections. I want to leave you with one other thought. There's been so many great speakers that have addressed a lot of things, and I'd love just to talk about the Second Amendment for a while. It's one of my favorite ones. But I'm not going to do that. I am going to tell you, though, that if I was king for a day, not that I'd want to be, I would set a rule down that said, as you're growing up in America as a young person, there's 3 things you have to do. You've got to play a team sport. Now, I don't care what sport it is. I played football. There's a lot of great sports out there, but you will have to play a team sport because that's how you learn you're not the most important person around. If your team's not working as a team, well, said another way, there is no I in team. I'd have you work with the public, and I think you learn more by having to serve people in that capacity than you're ever going to get out of a book. And I'm not against education. I think education's very, very important. But if you're serving the public and you're working on a commission, you're going to learn how important it is to deal with everybody that comes in the door of that store. And the last thing I would say is I want you to do some kind of public service, either military, Peace Corps, whatever, overseas. When you're living in some and most of the overseas locations, you will begin to appreciate and love the United States of America. I know that you all love the United States just like I do. And I know that that's why these meetings are so important. We've obviously got a long way to go, but because of people like you, I think we've got a chance of going there. I don't think we've passed the tipping point. I certainly hope not, but we've got a lot of work to do to clean up the mess we're in. Thank you very much. God bless you, and God bless America.